In today's video, we're going to speak of accurate inner conversations. Now, you've heard me mention this before. I brought up accurate thinking and intuition. Intuition guides us to the realization of our vision. So this video is for anybody that has a vision, a goal, a definite chief aim, something that they want to see brought forth into reality. The moment you select and assume that your vision is done, complete, already exists in what we refer to as the unseen reality, we begin the journey and maintain the journey to the realization of that vision. During the journey of realization of that vision, we experience what we call intuition, an inner voice or hunches and inspirations that guide us from within to the destination. We can further facilitate this intuition via inner conversations. And the intuition can further facilitate these inner conversations as well. So what we want to do is observe if on the day-to-day journey we are identifying with certain attributes that are experienced in the five sensory world and relating it from a place of inner resistance to both the vision and the journey. So we're going to talk about ways that we seem to give up the understanding that what we desire to see brought forth will be brought forth, or create unnecessary inner resistance, and we're going to bring forth a higher degree of accurate inner conversations through some examples in relation to your vision. So Neville Goddard states, "Heretofore, I thought I could change others through effort. Now I know I cannot change another unless I first change myself. To change another within my world, I must first change my concept of that other, and to do it best, I change the concept of myself. For it was the concept I held of myself that made me see others as I did." So we're going to refer to simplify this, in relation to people on the journey, relationships, business partners, etc., on the journey to bringing forth what we desire. Many of us want ideal relationships or ideal partnerships in business. And when we work with Neville's information, we recognize that what we're doing is we're changing how we relate to those individuals and how we assume those individuals relate to us. So we start at the top. We have a vision, a goal, a desire that we want to see brought forth. We take the desire and translate it over to a vision. That is our intent. As a result, we recognize an identity, a self-image, a concept of self. And then what happens is the day-to-day journey, which is riddled with revelations of our values and beliefs, our capabilities, our skills, our behaviors, and our environment. All of these attributes, values and beliefs, capabilities, behaviors, and environment, plus our integration with these elements, reveal the level of embodiment of our identity. Now, as we go through this journey, one of the things that happens is we reveal attributes via ourselves of our concept that we hold of ourselves based on how we assume people to be. So a person may have a vision of an ideal relationship or an ideal business client, and they may encounter what we call inner resistance on the journey. Now, so much of this inner resistance is found through what Robert Cialdini referred to in his book Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion as appeal to authority and perceived scarcity. Now, if you've read that book, which is a marketing book, he speaks about how there are these elements that are related to persuasion. And one of the reasons why we tend to do things or think things or assume things that don't seem to be in alignment with our vision is because we seem to be governed by certain programming that exists within us that causes us to perceive our vision or the journey from a place of scarcity, as well as perceive some of the opinions or suggestions from the outer world as authoritative rather than the authoritativeness of your own intuition. But in order to work with this information, we have to go a step higher. We got to go to where Neville usually speaks from, which is vision and identities, concept of self and imagination. And he states, causation is in the mind of the one who is self-persuaded, and there is no other cause, for the world is awareness pushed out. So what he's saying is that these interpretations of how we relate to whatever shows up in this outer world is found in the mind, and only the mind, and we can change these interpretations. In order to really grasp this concept, we must move from what is known as an external locus of control to more so each day to an internal locus of control. Let's look at the distinctions. Someone who's more internal locus of control, in other words, recognizes that how they relate to others and how others relate to them is based on elements of belief and assumption, interpretation, ideas, concept of self that is within. Someone who sees that as the correlation is going to be able to rearrange this outer world via the values and beliefs, capabilities, behaviors, and environments to reflect the vision. All of that happens subconsciously. A person doesn't necessarily have to think about what to do. They assume that ideal concept of self, and the way is revealed. On the flip side, if someone sees themselves as external locus of control, they might not recognize how the relationships that we have, the integration that they have with people, is based on the concept of self and the way they assume them to be and the way they assume themselves to be in relation to those people. So what do? They don't end up changing their inner conversations. So let's look at these. Internal locus of control. Someone who takes responsibility for reality. So it's our commitment then to take responsibility for our reality. The people, the environment, the circumstance, and information in our reality. Someone who has a higher degree of internal locus of control is not overly influenced by the opinions or suggestions from the outer world. That individual might keep into consideration those opinions and suggestions, but ultimately within finds the accurate interpretation and further facilitates it through affirmation. Knows how to get into the flow and maintain it. If one makes flow a priority, they will find that they will be able to stimulate this intuition more so and accurate thinking. Otherwise, if a person's not in flow or not making flow a priority, they may find themselves being reactive. And as a result of being reactive, what ends up happening is they don't think accurately. They may think overly pessimistic, or they may think that what they want to achieve, as in the kind of relationship that they want with the other person, the business partner and so forth, is not possible. And they're failing to recognize that they've got into a different state of mind. In that moment, they've assumed a different identity. And they're now interacting with that other person or that environment from that perspective. Internal locus of control focus their attention on what they want. Neville brought up in one of his lectures the importance of attention and imagination. What we put our attention on. Where is the source of where we put that attention on? Well, that's found via our beliefs within. And what we want is to incorporate a higher degree of internal locus of control. Now, we're going to go through some affirmations of how to do this. Rises up to higher levels of confidence during challenge. Independence or interdependence becomes how they relate with people. Stephen R. Covey has a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He speaks of the distinction between dependence, independence, and interdependence. Dependence meaning you are dependent on another person. Independence means you know how to get it for yourself, so you're independent. And interdependence is more of a spirit of harmony. Benefit for them, benefit for me, benefit for divine and evolution. Interdependence. It's a combination. Both individuals or the group of individuals who show up ready to deal together in the spirit of harmony are from a foundation of independence within themselves, creating the mastermind of interdependence. Unnecessary is excluded easily out of consciousness. So we may find our attention going onto certain elements in the five sensory world in which we call it distraction or certain kinds of disempowering meaning and so forth in relation to ourselves, in relation to the vision. When a person has changed how they relate to different information and so forth, they find that that information does not even show up within their awareness, or they relate to that information differently, in which they don't feel disempowered by it. Now, on the flip side, we got external locus of control. Those that overly identify with external locus of control may find themselves blaming aspects of the five sensory world or reality for their shortcomings or their inability to bring forth success. They may find themselves heavily influenced by the opinions of others to the point of overthinking and reactivity. They might not believe that they can change their situation through their own efforts, and as a result could identify with powerlessness and stagnation. The truth is, we always have the power. The truth is, where is the meaning that we are assigning within to either further affirm our vision or to create what is called powerlessness, which is the assumption that we don't have the power, but in actuality, we are assigning the meaning that we don't have the power. So causation in the mind of the one who is self-persuaded, as Neville states. So let's weave these together into an affirmation from the perspective of these internal locus of control elements. So you could say, I find myself taking more responsibility each day for my reality. I find myself listening to my voice of my ideal self-image of who I really am. And I may keep into consideration the opinions of others, but the ultimate interpreter of reality, and thus the ultimate decision maker, is myself. I prioritize my flow. I find myself in flow, knowing that while I'm in flow, I'm able to easily keep my attention on what I want. If I encounter any challenges, I see it as an opportunity to rise up to a higher degree of self-confidence. As a result, I become more independent, and when I relate with others, I relate to them from a place of interdependence. What is necessary and related to my vision shows up within awareness to contribute to my vision. As a result, I find myself revealing the power that I've always had within me. I recognize that this becomes an embodiment of my vision. It is reflected in my skills, my capabilities, my behaviors, and the cultivation of higher degrees of capability. It is also revealed in the environments. I notice that environments change to reflect this concept of myself. Now, when we're tying this into relating to each other or relating to an ideal relationship, what we want to do is bring forth a higher degree of internal locus of control from within, recognizing that as a result of this higher degree of internal locus of control, we will not perceive the outer world from a place of scarcity, and we'll be able to identify any meaning that we have associated to ourselves that has embedded itself in the self-image from outer world information in which we once thought was authoritative, and connect back to our true intuition and inner voice that facilitates it. Now, when I'm talking about inner voice that facilitates it, as mentioned earlier, I'm talking about the voice that speaks of possibility, that you do have the ability to bring forth your vision, that you can reinterpret the different experiences that you're having each day on your journey to bringing forth your vision. And as a result of changing the interpretations that you have on whatever shows up on the journey, you bring forth a higher degree of internal locus of control, and then it reveals itself on the environment, the outer world experience. So a while back, I had a conversation with one of my friends, and he was having a challenge doing sales. He felt that people were against him and weren't going to accept the value that he was providing. He mentioned to me about another friend who started a business, and he seemed to found it very easily to be able to pick up the phone and call people and make an offer to that individual and facilitate a sale and receive the funds. Both individuals had services of value, except one person saw reality from a place of scarcity, and the other person saw it from a place of abundance. So I had a conversation with both of them, and I started to get into their psychology, their inner conversations. The individual that was able to pick up the phone with ease would say things like, of course they're going to buy it. This is a value, and they want it. And they would also say things like, people welcome my conversation. They enjoy being around me. And the other person would communicate in a way where they would say, there isn't enough people that are interested in buying my product or service. Or, it doesn't look like, from what other people are saying, my business is going to succeed. Now, when we go back to what we talked about relating to Robert Cialdini's book, Influence Psychology of Persuasion, I recommend reading it. He mentions two principles in there. There's a handful of other principles, but two of them, scarcity and authority. It seems, for whatever the reason may be, and Robert Cialdini says it really well, our typical reaction to scarcity hinders our ability to think. People seem to be more motivated by the thought of losing something rather than by the thought of gaining something of equal value. And I could say greater value as well. So our typical reaction to scarcity hinders our ability to think. It seems to stifle our inner conversations, our inner dialogues that are accurate, our intuition, and it seems to bring forth certain instinctual responses to whatever it is that we're experiencing. Now, this is a result of this perceived scarcity. When what we really want to do is ask ourselves, is this really true? Is it really true that you cannot get the clients that you want for your business? Is it really true that you are not the person of value in relation to the vision? When we start to ask ourselves these questions, we bring forth the intuition. We start to facilitate the ideal in our conversations. And then we change how we relate to those particular experiences. Now, this comes from the understanding that what we're really doing here is recognizing that this is about changing the concept of ourself, the identity that we embody. And as Neville states here, causation is in the mind of the one who is self-persuaded, and there is no other cause, for the world is awareness pushed out. So by bringing ourselves more into an internal locus of control, we start to ask these questions, and they're educated questions. That's why we call this accurate thinking. And from these educated questions, we start to find the true meaning regarding the circumstance. So when I had a conversation with my friend about the other individual and the way he thought and how it was relating to that person's experience, he started to embody those same ways of thinking. And as a result, his sales went up and his business started to grow. Two different outcomes in reality that were driven by different concepts of self. But when my friend changed his concept of himself to mirror what the other person was saying, which was from a place of true authority towards results, he began to change. Now, here's the interesting thing about authority. Robert Cialdini also says, once we realize that obedience to authority is mostly rewarding, it is easy to allow ourselves the convenience of automatic obedience. And upon deeper conversation with my friend, I realized that he did not learn these ideas about a concept of self that is not in harmony with the vision through his intuition. He learned it from other people in which he thought they were authoritative. The other individual, when I had a conversation with him, I discovered that he happened to be around people that were authoritative based on success, as in they had the results. And they would say certain things to him, and it allowed him to assume that concept of self, that it was easier for him to make sales and grow his business, and whereas my friend did not. So he seemed to have given his power away to believing a person in authority, or as I put here, perceived authority. So what we want to do is we want to take more responsibility. We want to go back to internal locus of control. Because when we go back to internal locus of control, we're going to question what authority means. Just because somebody presents themselves in a way of authority doesn't necessarily mean you have to listen to what they're saying. If it is not in harmony with your vision, we can question it. We can ask ourselves, is this really true? What we'll then find is we'll have a greater ability to connect to our intuition, who would guide us to perhaps somebody with true authority that will allow us to identify with their beliefs, their interpretations, that we can integrate into our concept of ourselves to facilitate results. A while back, I brought up a distinction between instinct and intuition. I mentioned that there's so much fight or flight or interpretations that form this self-image that create what we call instinct, fight or flight responses, or certain knee-jerk responses, as discussed in Robert Cialdini's book, such as scarcity and authority. They can be helpful for us, but at the same time, they might not be helpful to us. So what we really want to listen to is the voice of the ideal, the true inner voice that is facilitated by intuition. It is this voice that allows us to question if we are interpreting the five sensory experience from a place of scarcity or from a place of true abundance, that you can bring forth what you desire. We also want to work with this intuition to be able to understand what is authoritative information, true information in relation to the vision, or information that is not true in relation to the vision, inner discernment. Now, what we find is that if a person does not develop this, they identify with a concept of self that seems to want to look for approval and validation from the outer world. And if that concept of self is one that represents over-identifying with scarcity-based information from the outer world, embodying that information, identifying with that information, the inner dialogue of that individual becomes that same conversation. And that information may not be relevant to the true inner dialogue in relation to the vision. And if they don't recognize that they are identifying with that information, that becomes embedded in the concept of self. And as a result, they begin to think, behave, act, and interpret reality from that perspective. And so what we want to do is be discerning on the kind of information that we are consuming. And more accurately put, questioning if we need to be identifying with that information, knowing that if we become identified with that information, then what will happen is the concept of self will change to reflect a concept of self that would be related to that information, which may not be the concept of self in relation to your vision. So now I integrate this in here because what we're interested in is inner approval and inner validation. Inner validation from a place of abundance and inner approval from a place of inner authority. Inner authority. The truth is that you know your way to the vision. As you develop a higher degree of internal locus of control, you're going to bring forth the infinite amount of creativity that is within you. as you bring it forth, you'll recognize what he's saying here. Causation is in the mind of the one who is self-persuaded, and there's no other cause, for the world is awareness pushed out. You can look at this as an extreme form of internal locus of control. And we don't have to adopt this overnight. We become like this more so each day via our inner conversations. So we ask ourselves, what is the inner dialogue that is from a place of inner authority that we could further affirm in relation to the vision, the capabilities, the behaviors, and the environment? Is there any kind of inner conversations that are from a place of scarcity in relation to the environment, behaviors, capabilities, values, and beliefs? For example, one of the conversations that I had with my friend as we were working on evolving his sales ability was about behaviors. He was afraid to ask for the money because he thought that that was a behavior that was considered inappropriate. He was taught that from people from his past that were from a position of authority. In some shape or form, they communicated to him in which he formed this interpretation within himself that it's wrong to ask for money. And what this translated was into certain kinds of behaviors where he would have very deep conversations with his clients, and then he would have a hard time making an offer at the end. And he was having inner conversations in his mind before he would ask for the money. He would say things like, perhaps I'm not good enough. And so what we did was we changed those inner conversations around. We started to integrate certain inner conversations / affirmations like, I am a person of value. People are ready to receive fair value exchange, my product and service for their compensation. They joyously show up ready to receive my value. I joyously show up ready to receive the compensation. And what would happen was his identity would change. His concept of self would change. He would not only bring forth the results and his business started to grow, he also would move into a higher degree of internal locus of control because he recognizes that it was this internal interpretation that was stored within the subconscious that seems to bubble onto the surface as mental chatter, which is distinct from the true inner voice that speaks of abundance. And he chose to identify more with the harmonious inner voice conversation that's facilitated by intuition. As a result of further integrating this, his confidence started to go up, and he started to really think for himself. And he would come up with even more accurate interpretations, beliefs, assumptions that he never learned from anywhere else or the outer world, but he was finding them within. And then he would identify with these affirmations, these inner conversations, and his reality would continue to change. And this is a process we all go through in this journey to bringing forth our vision. So this is what we want to do. We want to observe our inner conversations in relation to people and recognize the following. How do we see ourselves in relation to them? Do we see it from the perspective of they want to be with us, they want to do business with us, they want to deal with us? And how do we see ourselves in relation to them? Do we see ourselves as we are a person of value to them? We bring forth a fair value exchange. We operate from a place of interdependence. And if we find any kind of inconsistencies behind the inner conversations, we can change this inner conversation around to bring forth the reality that we want to see. If you want a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.